This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
Labour are going to win this election right across the country, but we need to have an opposition in place, some sort of opposition that actually challenges from the right of centre in terms of politics. But the good news is that a hell of a lot of people are saying, I'm voting for you, Howard, I'm voting for you, Howard. I get that a lot. And the reason why they're doing that is a lot to do with the fact Nigel Farage is now the leader of the party.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, in a week where a Medway housing development banned cats and kids, education bills kept swelling, and new policies from the Tories that could lead to thousands more homes in Kent. I'm Daniel Weston, local democracy reporter covering district and borough councils in Kent. I'm joined by Robert Boddy, who keeps tabs on Medway Council for us.
Hello.
Our colleague Simon, who covers Kent County Council, is away this week, so instead we're joined by KM News editor Sean Delaney.
Hello.
As usual, we're of course joined by the one and only KM Group political editor Paul Francis.
Hello.
And our special guest this week is Howard Cox, the Reform Party candidate for Dover and Deal at the general election. So first up is Robert. What's been going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, we talk a lot about planning stories, but this is a slightly unusual one, as a planning application was approved just outside of Cliff Woods on the Hoo Peninsula for about 25 houses, but on the condition only that no kids under the age of 16 or cats are allowed to live there. It's a new design for a set of retirement accommodation, hence the no kids under 16, which councillors were more in favour of than previous designs, which had been approved, with one set of proposals that were submitted previously being compared to a gulag camp. The new plans were approved 13 votes for and 2 votes against.
I don't know what policy the gulags had on cats and children, but what's the reason for a cat ban, and can they actually enforce it?
Well, so the site is quite close to the Chatterton Woods and Lodge Hill site of special scientific interest, which is home to significant populations of nightingales. The cat ban has been applied to a couple of developments nearby to try and protect the endangered birds. Is it enforceable? Well, that's one of the questions councillors asked officers, who said anyone who bought one of these houses would be well aware of the rules before purchasing. There's an additional condition which I thought was quite interesting as well, which was that 6 of the properties will be sold at a discounted price as affordable homes, which is fairly typical, but they will remain registered as discounted, meaning that if they're sold on in the future, a discount will still be applied on every resale to keep it as an affordable house.
Interesting. Turning to you, Sean, what news do you bring from the County Council?
So, a seasoned local education expert and former Kent Grammar School head, Peter Reid, has told us that the cost of privately educating kids with special educational needs has tripled in the past few years. This is costing the County Council around $84 million in 2022 to 2023. As a result of this, the County Council is scrambling to find ways of reducing that cost.
So firstly, for the benefit of listeners, why does KCC have anything to do with private education in Kent?
Yeah, so county councils, including Kent, will sometimes pay for a student to go to a private school rather than a state one. These aren't usually storied historical private schools like King's. They're specialist schools designed especially for kids with special educational needs that mainstream state schools can't properly cater for.
And yeah, like you say, obviously a lot of children with special educational needs do go to state schools. So where do state schools come into this equation?
A county council report from last week says that mainstream state schools need to do way more to cater for children with special educational needs. An expert commentary on it suggests in practice this means secondary schools may be expected to provide for kids who are working at an educational level 6 or 7 years below their actual age, when they're already very stretched as it is.
So it sounds like quite a difficult policy problem. Does anyone actually have any ideas for long-term solutions to this?
Well, it doesn't seem like it right now. I mean, Peter Reid stressed to us that the period of lockdown during the pandemic has massively contributed towards a spike in numbers of kids with special educational needs. And since that's affected basically a whole generation of children, this issue will probably be with us for a long time to come.
And what have you been looking at, Dan?
So I've had the dubious honour of scanning the Tory manifesto for any policies which might affect Kent after the general election if they end up winning. I stumbled upon one about scrapping nutrient neutrality rules for developments to get houses built faster, which sounds pretty arid, but it's actually quite a major issue in Kent.
So what are these rules and what do they mean for Kent?
So basically, as it stands at the moment, these rules make it so that developers and councils have to prove that when they build homes or the like, they can offset the effect the building will have on nutrient levels in local water through pollution and water runoff and construction and that kind of thing. In East Kent, this has been a problem for a long time. There's something called the Stodmarsh Nature Reserve. It's this huge wetland nature reserve. And like a lot of the country's waterways, it's quite badly polluted. So the nutrient neutrality rules in Kent have meant that across several districts, mainly Canterbury and Ashford, thousands of homes have been held in planning limbo because the councils have given consent for them to be built. But the developers, the councils and the government can't agree on a way of mitigating the potential polluting impact of those developments.
So would scrapping these rules work, and what have people made of it?
So the policy that is in the Tory manifesto says that developers would have to pay a one-off fee to help fund mitigation efforts against pollution and the like for all of their developments. But otherwise, it's pretty light on detail. So whether or not that would raise enough money to fund meaningful anti-pollution measures in any significant way is unclear. But impressively, the policy has drawn the ire of everyone involved, both environmentalists and developers. CPRE, the countryside charity, tell me that it's basically a licence for more poor quality housing across East Kent. And developers tell me that the plans are so vague as to be meaningless, and that if this was such a good idea, government should have done it over the last 4 years or so. And now turning to Paul Francis, KM's political editor. What's been catching your attention this week?
Well, guess what? It's the election.
Funny
And the election cavalcade rolled on through the country, but not through Kent. And it's manifesto week, with the parties setting out their bag of goodies in an attempt to woo the support of people like you and I. Now, this is the first time Rishi Sunak had appeared in a public event to answer questions about not just the manifesto, but the D-Day celebrations, where he skipped out early and had to make an apology. So there was a lot at stake for the Prime Minister, and I think he did just about enough to hold the line.
I guess there's no way you can come out of an interview on leaving D-Day event early and actually come out of it particularly well. Did you think it was an impressive avoidance of it?
Well, I wouldn't say impressive. It was a necessary avoidance. So he was trying to draw a line under this particular episode, and I think he's going to struggle to do that for the remaining part of the campaign. And 6 weeks suddenly looks a very long time. So I suspect he'll have to answer questions about that still as the countdown begins to July the 4th.
And so you mentioned it's manifesto week. Just for the benefit of listeners, we are recording this without having yet seen the Labour manifesto, but many of the other ones are out. What's caught your eye in the sort of slew of party propaganda this week?
If you wade through all 79 pages, you'll come out with a thumping headache. That's the Conservative manifesto, which was first unveiled. Now, it didn't really, to me, set out anything particularly new. There were a couple of interesting measures for the self-employed in terms of cutting their business rates.
And I think scrapping national insurance for people who are self-employed as well.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So there was an attempt to offer some goodies to the self-employed. Again, nothing really terribly dynamic. He talked about the need to stop the boats coming again, but not really adding any policy details to that commitment.
Have you made much of the Liberal Democrat and Green manifestos as yet? Or
no, I'm still looking at them with a careful eye. I think what's interesting is that of those parties, this is the first time the Green Party has had quite so much attention as some of the other parties, and indeed has suffered some backlash over some of its candidates and has suspended 4 candidates for various alleged misdemeanours. So they're just becoming like the other parties in that sense. So I think their prospects are not particularly good in Kent, but it'd be interesting to see whether more people turn to them than the Lib Dems.
I've had a bit of a skim through the Lib Dem manifesto myself, and one of the things that caught my eye was they say at a national level they feel quite free to say they need to build more housing, but it's a bit of a cliche that at a local level the Liberal Democrats are one of the most consistently and vocally anti-housing parties, at least at the level of individual planning committees, and many of their own MPs even will lobby in Parliament against particular housing developments in their constituency, even though that's technically not their business. That's a council problem.
I mean, the other interesting thing about the Green Party in Kent is it seems to be picking up support from disaffected Tories. That's happening on the doorstep, and you perhaps would not have envisaged that maybe a year or longer.
I spoke to the Green leader of Folkestone Hive District Council a few weeks ago about the past year they've spent in office, and there's something he was quite open about to me as well, which is that the base of Green support in Kent, and a lot of them is in sort of rural, leafy, agricultural areas, and a lot of them are disaffected former Tory voters, which kind of sits at odds with the fact that if the Green Party membership is in general very left-wing, and a lot of them consider themselves quite radical, whereas a lot of the people who are voting for the Green Party are quite moderately minded former Tories who are quite environmentally conscious.
Yeah, and I think one of the things which might benefit the Tories is the fact that they might split the vote between them and the Lib Dems in terms of the kind of the protest vote in some of these three-way marginal seats in the county.
You seen anything interesting on the campaign trail in Kent this week, which has changed your mind about how things are going to go?
No, but our guest Howard Cox did, when I asked him about whether there was going to be significant results for the Reform Party, he was hedging his bets a little bit, but did hint that he felt there might be one or two surprises along the way, although I personally don't see them getting any seats in Kent.
Okay, interesting. I guess we'll see. So as we mentioned earlier, this week is manifesto week, and the parties are coming out left, right and centre, both literally and metaphorically, to offer inducements to voters to convince them that they're the ones worth voting for. One that caught my eye in particular was the Labour Party releasing a very glitzy campaign video saying motorists are safe under Labour, and announcing their own war on potholes and attempt to patch up the country's roads. Robert, I remember there's a bit of an interesting relationship between the Labour Party over in Medway and potholes, are there not?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a little while ago now. Medway Council basically said that the amount of money that had been given to them from reallocated HS2 money just wasn't enough, and they predicted, I think it was around more than £1 million was needed to get Medway's roads into a fit and proper state. And they wrote to the Department of Transport about this and received a very sort of terse and quite strange letter, not normally phrased in basically saying that Medway Labour were sort of not talking a lot of sense.
It was quite aggressive and quite openly political for a letter from a minister to a local government leader.
I think he sort of misconstrued that the over £1 million figure was all about potholes and said, is it really costing you £25,000 per pothole, which is not what the letter was actually saying. But yeah, I mean, potholes... we've talked many times. Simon as well on KCC grounds. We talk about potholes. It is a major issue that people really care about. Everyone who drives, even if you don't drive, you cycle. It's a major issue. So it's not surprising to me that Labour are making this a big policy point.
And do you reckon Labour councillors in Medway are enthused that if their man comes into government, he might be offering the money they say they need to sort their roads out? Or are they concerned because Starmer speaks the language of fiscal discipline quite openly, so if repairing potholes in Medway is that expensive, maybe it's not the end of the road for them.
I think it's fair to say that Labour councillors in Medway are positive about the possibilities of a Labour government. Whether they are as confident about sort of some of the promises that might be getting made, they're not going to tell me how sceptical they are. I'm sure people can understand why. But I think from what I'm understanding from them, they believe they're more likely to get what they need under a Labour government, maybe because of it's a party that's in tune with them, or maybe they just think that their Conservatives are never going to do it for them.
Sticking with the topic of roads, Paul, what do you make of every party except maybe the Greens quite sort of openly competes for the motorist vote, and sort of being a motorist or a driver now seems to be an increasingly politicised identity, which it wasn't even a few years ago. Yeah,
it's interesting to see that kind of strategy policy switch towards something which wasn't an issue maybe 10 or so years ago. Councils routinely putting out press releases on the back of government allocations, describing them as blitz on potholes has entered the local government lexicon. And I think that's a recognition that motorists are and can be a powerful lobby on the government, and have got people who are canny enough to know how the system works and address and draw attention to what actually is a very serious problem, because potholed roads lead to more accidents, lead to more injuries, lead to more compensation claims.
Moving on to something only sort of partially related, parties make promises here or there, but some new research by sort of favoured polling guru in the UK, John Curtis, has shown what I would imagine isn't a surprise to many, is that trust in politics and politicians is at an all-time low, which I'm pretty sure I've heard in every poll in trust on politics and politicians for the past 10 years. But Paul, what do you make of these results, and does the future hold any change in that regard? You think a new incoming Labour government will repair the relationship between politics and the people?
I think it's beyond one party saying they can fix the disillusionment, disenchantment faction. But I do think there's perhaps more hope when you look at the local government arrangements, and councillors who are very committed towards helping out local constituents is a good example of how politics does work at the sharp end, at the coalface. So there's perhaps an opportunity for local government to restore the balance and make themselves more amenable and approachable and acting in alignment with what their constituents' concerns are.
Interesting, because I feel like covering local government for a while, I feel like what I've noticed is that people think local government is significantly closer to the public in terms of trust and the relationship between members members of the public and politicians. But I think in many ways it's even further. Local election turnouts are absolutely derisory. The pool of people who participate in local politics and government in any consistent and organised way is quite minuscule. And it seems to me that most parties are pretty, they seem to know this is the case, but they're uncomfortable admitting it. You get council by-elections where somebody is elected on 20% turnout, and people of all parties seem to recognise that and not, they know it, but it's not really a major issue that any of them feel they can do anything about.
Well, one interesting factor is that, before the Commons prorogued, there were 15 independent MPs, more MPs than the Liberal Democrats had, 15 independent MPs, the large bulk of which had been suspended by their own party. So there's a joke in there about naming a new party, but it does just illustrate perhaps that, there is a more serious problem than is being acknowledged by the Commons.
Well, I guess we'll get a sort of early midterm effects after the general election, because a year from now there'll be county council elections as well. So I guess that'll be the first, in Kent at least, that'll be the first potential speed bump on the road for the next Labour government, and see if they manage to enthuse people more than governments of the past 30 years have done so.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
Dover has long been a bellwether seat, often voting for the party which wins in national government. But over recent years, it's increasingly been in the headlines because it's on the front line of the immigration debate in this country. The Reform Party says that this is the immigration election, and their former London mayoral candidate and current parliamentary candidate for Dover and Deal, Howard Cox, joins me now. Howard, thanks for coming in.
Hello, it's great to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm just a bit tired. I've been knocking on doors today and interested in getting a lot of people's, basically frustrations. They're just not happy about anything at the moment. A lot of them are really undecided, which is great to actually talk to them, try and convince them.
Okay, good to hear you're keeping busy. So, firstly, before we get into the nitty-gritty, do you mind telling me a bit about yourself? What do you do? How do you end up getting into politics, and how are you standing for Dover and Deal?
Really, most of my life I've actually been involved in communications and marketing. That's the sort of thing for small businesses and helping small businesses. And about in 2010, I met a person which I think you all know, a guy called Peter Carroll, and he was running a logistics haulage business, and we just chewed the cud one day over a cup of tea, and he was telling me how much the cost of fuel for his 40-ton trucks, basically. We're doing about 7 or 8 miles to the gallon. How much they're paying in tax? And we said, this is ridiculous. At the time, it was about 70%. So it's stupid. And of that, it was not fuel duty, VAT on fuel duty. I won't bore you with the details of that. But fundamentally, that gave birth to a campaign to fight the government called Fair Fuel UK. Peter left after a couple of years running that. But the history of Fair Fuel UK in the last 14, 15 years is that we've managed to freeze fuel duty in that time. And it's probably the most successful public affairs campaign ever, especially regarding taxation and levies and that sort of thing. And we probably saved most people, average family, something like £3,000 to £4,000 since 2010 of filling up costs.
And from that, you sort of get involved in more direct party politics?
Well, I was approached. I was on various media outlets, and I bumped into a guy called Richard Tice, the former leader of Reform UK. And we hit it off. He had a show on Talk TV. It's now just Talk Radio now. They've gone back that. They're no longer a television programme. But he had a show every Sunday morning, and I used to actually appear for half an hour on a section on his show called Tice Gear. It's very original. But we were talking about the politics of motoring, basically, how it's impacting on people effectively, everything from white van men, bikers and truckers, all the way to a person wanting to go to hospitals because they need their car, etc. So we talked, and after probably about 8 or 9 months, he just said, let's go and have a coffee. He said, I'd like you to stand for London Mayor. I took 3 months to say yes to that, because I wasn't sure about if I really wanted to do that. But I was so angry with what was happening in London in regard to ULEZ, LTNs. I could go on for 20 mile an hour limits, excessively wide cycle lanes. I could go on forever about the motorists. But bear in mind also the job meant being in charge of the police, housing, planning, etc., all those sorts of things. Yeah, so I said yes to it, and that's how I got into the politics. Out of the 11, I came 5th. I didn't do very well indeed, but there's a number of reasons for that, and I think that's a time for another programme perhaps to talk about that. But then they said, you did so well, they were so pleased with me. They said, would you like to stand as an MP? And I was offered 3 seats, and I won't tell you what the 3 seats are, but because this is an immigration election, they wanted someone with a bit of notoriety, actually, regarding Fair Fuel UK. Bear in mind, I've got 1.7 million supporters across the UK who signed up to support Fair Fuel UK since 2010. I thought, why not? Let's do this. And the other person who actually mentioned, you may have heard of the guy, Nigel Farage, he said, and Howard's known me for a long time. I wrote some of his European election 2015 manifesto regarding transport, and that gave birth to their promise of cutting fuel duty by 20 pence per litre. How could I refuse? So going from there on, I'm now standing in Dover and Deal, and I'm delighted I'm doing so.
So you said you're out knocking doors in Dover and Deal today, and I imagine many other days. How's the campaign trail treating you? What are people saying to you on the doorstep? What's the reception like?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, most people are really fed up with the Labour and they're fed up with Tories. That's the simple, the two-party system. A lot of them are saying I can't see much difference between the two. We can argue about semantics of their manifestos. I've been listening to today's one, various things that are coming out on the airways. Fundamentally, all we're hearing about is actually what they're going to do and spend, and why the Tories particularly haven't done it for the last 14 years. Beggars belief. This is an important thing to get across to your listeners. I voted Tory for the last 50 years. I'm 70 this year, and I voted Tory for the last 50 years, and I feel betrayed. And that's one reason, another reason why I'm standing. And as far as Labour is concerned, they are so anti-car, anti-motorist. They're going to put up, they deny they're going to put up certain taxes, but they haven't absolutely firmly said they're not going to put up fuel duty and various other things like that related to people who drive cars, drive trucks, etc. And let's be clear about this. There are 37 million drivers in this country. They all vote. And they are fed up to the back teeth of being used as basically undemocratically, inflicted on. You've got to drive an electric vehicle. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. You've got to drive at 20 mile an hour. Look what happened in Wales and all those sorts of things. So fundamentally, what I'm hearing, to answer your question directly, is a lot of people are undecided. In percentage terms, I would say there's quite a few people going to vote Labour. I've come across a lot of people like that. And to be honest, the reason why they're doing that is because they think that something like Reform UK, I've had it in London, the London Mayoral, if you vote for Reform UK, you're going to get Sadiq Khan. Well, I'm sorry, it's a bit like this situation now. If you vote for Reform UK, you're going to get Labour anyway. Labour are going to win this election right across the country, but we need to have an opposition in place, some sort of opposition that actually challenges from the right of centre in terms of politics. But the good news is that a hell of a lot of people are saying, I'm voting for you, Howard. I'm voting for you, Howard. I get that a lot. And the reason why they're doing that is a lot to do with the fact Nigel Farage is now the leader of the party.
So you mentioned that you meet a lot of people say they're going to vote Labour, and the polls have said for quite a long time that Labour are set to take Dover and Deal. You probably noticed the Labour candidate there and former guest on our podcast.
I'm catching him up.
Mike Tapp. Yeah. He's been working the seat for a very long time. What do you make of him and your chances against him?
Well, I don't know him that well, but I think he was in the army. I think he was in the intelligence corps. As is the Tory guy. I think he was in the intelligence. I think in the same regiment. This is what I'm learning. I don't really know much about them. All I know is that Labour are good. They favour mass immigration. They've got open door policy, open borders, etc. And one of the biggest things, when I ask anyone on the doorstep or walking through the high street, talking to small business, what's the biggest issues? And there's two or three of them, but at the top of it is immigration, and they don't want. They're the town Dover. And don't forget, Dover and Deal. It got warmer. We got St Margaret's Bay. There's lots of lovely villages inland, etc. It's not just Dover. I sometimes think people think that's all we talk about is Dover, but fundamentally, what people are saying to me is they can't take any more of people coming in. I spoke to a homeless guy. In fact, two policemen were trying to get him to move on, and I said, "Why are you doing that?" He wasn't causing any problem. He's sitting there. In the end, they let him go, and I just sat down with him and talked to him, bought him a cup of tea, and I just said, what do you feel about politics? And he was quite actually eloquent the way he spoke. And one of the things he said, well, why is it I'm at the bottom of the pile and yet those immigrants over there get a house? And that's the sort of mentality I'm getting back from people. People just don't understand why we've had 2 million immigrants come in the last couple of years. We have 700,000 in net migration in the last year. Why is this going on? Because it's impacting on our economy, it's impacting on our lives, our history, our heritage, our culture, our values, all those sorts of things. I'm not anti-immigration, provided it's controlled, managed, and fair.
We know Labour, in your view, is a bit softer on the issue of immigration, if you like. So why do you think it's getting support? You said it's going to win and people are voting for it, particularly in a seat like Dover, where this issue is all too evident.
Well, I'm closing the gap in Dover. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I can win, Paul. I really believe I can do this. And the more I talk to people, the more they're telling me, says, well, we want to know more about your policies. And as I did in the London mayoral situation, what I did do is I said, look, because Reform UK has a reputation, has an image in some people. And this is the sort of thing we've had. Because Brexit, UKIP, we go back. You can track the actual evolution of Reform UK. But when I say, right, I'm going to take off my rosette. Let's just talk about the policies. And whether you're right wing or left wing, whatever you are, all of our policies, near as damn it, they all agree with. And the fact is that what is going down well is for the youngsters are quite liking the idea of the fact is they won't have to pay tax till, in terms of £20,000, the threshold, before they start paying tax, which, is going to give them about 30 quid more per week. Obviously, we won't be in government to put that in place, but that's our mentality and now what we're trying to do to put people on our side. Paul, what you just said to me about why do I think Labour are going to win? Well, Labour are going to win by default. They don't have to do anything. You've heard of the Ming Vase story, where Starmer could just walk around with Ming Vase, provided he doesn't drop it. Yeah. He's going to be okay. I often say to you, he can commit mass murder and he'll still win. But the thing is, there are certain seats, and Dover and Deal is a target seat for Reform UK that we believe we can turn it around. Not just Clacton.
Some of the ones I still stay on topic of both immigration and Dover. So I've lived in Dover pretty much my whole life. I think you're right, it is a big issue that people there care about. I mean, how specifically do you think immigration has affected Dover in particular? Everyone knows the sort of macroeconomic picture, but how do you think immigration has affected Dover and Deal in the constituency?
Well, I think we shouldn't just separate Dover. It's affecting the country as well. But you asked that question, so I'm going to try and answer it. And what I see at the moment is a lot of deprivation, a lot of shops closed, a lot of places like that sort of thing. Not much for the youngsters to do in the evening. One young lad came up to me. He was by the swings and it was by the bus station there, and he came up to me because he saw my rosette. He said, and he started poking at me. He says, well, what are you going to do for us? And I said, okay, let's sit down and have a chat about it. What do you want? There's nothing for us to do in Dover. There's nothing to do. And the police are always moving us on, all that sort of thing. And he made the point, actually, there's a lot of homeless people, but loads of immigrants hanging around the place, and we're scared, I can't say the word, strongly, they are very scared of actually going out at night. The young girls, sort of thing. There's no real good nightlife for them. This particular guy said, just give us a 10-pin bowling alley. It doesn't take much to actually try and actually cheers these people up. And but then I went on to say, have you got a job? He said, no, I'm trying to get a job, and he's just come out of college. But I think he's another quite articulate person. And I mentioned the fact that what we want to do is give you more money in your pocket. And he said, yes, please.
Howard Nigel said recently that he felt there was change in the air, as it were. And when I asked him about whether there'd be a repeat of the county council elections in 2017 when UKIP won about 20 seats and nearly took power, he said it could happen. Could it?
Paul, if you'd asked me this about 8 or 9 months ago, I would agree with the polls that we're not going to get any seats, except perhaps Lee Anderson, obviously, as you know, because he's moved over from the Tories to us, and he's got Ashby up there. The message is on getting back from some very senior Reform UK people, and people like Anne Widdecombe, who, she's been around the block a few times. She's not standing, but she's actually talking to people. And I'm very close to a lot of the backbench Tory MPs, who are no longer MPs now, of course, because I had 70 of them supporting Fairfield UK, in terms of they agreed that that's how we got a freeze in fuel duty, because I managed to mobilise MPs to make sure that the Chancellor of the day actually listened to drivers. But the message I'm getting across is that we can do this in certain seats. My prediction is that I think 4 to 5 seats across the country. I don't know whether one of them, I want it to be Dover and Deal, and I'm going to be busting my butt off to try and achieve that. We're only 22 days away. And there's no doubt about it, Rishi Sunak did wrong for all of us. We didn't expect that to happen. And we're contesting over 600 seats across the whole of the UK, which is great news to do that. And you think, 500 quid deposit, 600 times 5, that's £300,000. You're looking at, those are the sorts of things. So we had to raise funds, raise money. But we're serious about being. It is a journey. It's a journey to 2029. And but when you get a situation whereby you remember the UKIP days of 4 million votes and only got one seat with Douglas Carswell, or was it Mark?
Did he defect?
Yes, exactly. He didn't actually. You got it spot on. So no one was elected at all. But we got no seats for 4 million. Yet to SNP with 1.2 million, 1.3 million got about 50 seats, 58 seats.
And in line with Reform Party policy on that kind of issue, are you also in favour of proportional representation?
Of course, I'm bound to say that. Obviously, the smaller parties are going to go for that. There's no doubt about it. Interesting, Labour are believe in that too, but they're not talking about it now because they're so far ahead.
Well, I don't know if it'll be in the manifesto, but I know for a fact calls for PR among Labour membership are extremely popular, but calls for it from the leadership never really seem to go anywhere, and they don't often endorse it as policy because the Labour Party would probably fall apart under PR.
That's the problem with the leadership of all the parties. Are so detached from the grassroots people. We got a prime minister wasn't elected by the grassroots members, and this is what's sad about things. And I'm fundamentally fed up.
Hold on a minute, Howard. You swap leader without having a vote with any of your members.
You're absolutely right, but Nigel's been around the block, and he's probably the most influential politician in the last decade, 15 years. And Paul, be honest, do you think anyone with reform doesn't want Nigel leading the party? I can promise you he doesn't need to do a vote. I know
I'll plead the fifth on that.
I don't think
point taken, though.
Does reform even have sort of internal structures like governing committee and all member votes, that kind of thing? Because it's run technically as a company owned by Richard Tyson, Nigel Farage, isn't it?
Correct.
Rather than
that's right.
Party.
I mean, Reform UK Limited or whatever it is, it's irrelevant to me. I mean, everyone, money comes in. It could be tax advantages. I don't know. I've got a limited company, with Fairfield UK. The underlying company is called Equipcode Limited. Before people start looking for it, and it doesn't make any money. All the money goes back into campaigning, and that's what's happening with Reform UK. All the money, any donation that comes in, goes into campaigning, and the limited aspect, actually, there is some protection as being directors, all that sort of thing in terms of being a limited basis. But Nigel and him run the show, and under them there's about 30 people in headquarters who at the moment are non-stop on the phone talking to helping candidates, because 600 candidates, managing those from 30 people. Watch this space.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you got any endorsements ahead of the 4th of July, or are you keeping your cards close?
I'm keeping the cards close to the chest, thanks to Paul. But there are things coming down the line, yes.
Bringing it back to obviously reform, and you've said it, and Reform Party say it, is that this is the immigration election. I wanted to ask something a bit more on national policy, a bit more abstract, but do you not, I think there's an argument to be made that maybe there's a contradiction in Reform's policy on immigration and economic policy. Because I was reading the Reform website today, and it says, very free market, sort of, post-Thatcherite, very, says in the website that Britain should be run like an efficient business. But many people point out, surely it's big business which is very much in favour of unlimited migration because it suppresses domestic wages. So do you not think that maybe the pressure that reform will exert on politics in this country might be quite contradictory, because you want controlled immigration in what you argue is the national interest, but the businesses which you want to sort of deregulate and allow to do their thing a bit more really, really want large numbers of low-skilled migration, insofar as that term means anything?
I see the paradox there. You've got right to point that out. The thing is, what we want to do is increase wages, people being paid more money, they keep more of their money, and we want skilled labour, and that skilled labour we'd like to come from Britain, here, from British people, British employees. And at the moment, even Keir Starmer said today, I heard it on the radio this morning as I was driving down to Dover, I heard him say that we want to ban bad bosses who employ cheap labour. So we're all on the same page at this sort of thing. The health, like nurses and things, they'll be excluded from that. We want them over here. We need nurses. So there's certain sectors. But for just cheap labour, when we've got people over here, we've got to actually, and that's why we've got this immigration tax, which is the national insurance, which if you employ people from overseas, you can do it. We're not going to ban you for it. We don't believe in banning things, but you're going to have to pay for it because you're not choosing British people first.
I see. So something else a bit broader is, like you say, Labour are probably going to win the election, barring any unforeseen circumstances. What do you think a Labour government over the next few years would hold for Kent?
It scares the living daylights out of me. It absolutely does. Obviously, in terms of the motoring side of things, I mean, I'm very close to that. But I'm scared of the open door policy in terms of immigrants. Paul quite rightly said,
they say they want restriction on immigration.
Yeah, but I believe it when I see it. It's, Tony Blair opened the doors for loads to come in, and we know what that is. And as one Labour guy says, the more we get in, the more Labour votes we get, because they're more likely to be socialist, which cracked me up a bit. But anyway, what's happening in Kent and what's happening in Dover, I think I'm really worried. I've spoken to a lot of people who drive cars, and for the last 15 years I've managed to hold fuel duty down. I've introduced pump watch. That was my idea. Claire Coutinho took that on board for my recommendation, but it's got no teeth because they haven't pushed it hard enough, and that was one of the next things I was going to be pushing hard if we're going to have an election, say in November, because I assumed there'd be another budget before with the Tories, because then they would announce incredible pull the white rabbits out of the hat with various tax cuts. But I'm scared the fact the cost of motoring, which is going to hit logistics industry, is going to hit inflation, and the open door policy or immigration, and there's some other things as well. A certain thing which I feel very strong about is the net zero cost, or the green policies, etc. I just really care passionately about the fact is stop hurting people in the pocket. There are other ways of actually improving. I want a great planet for my children. I want, a breathe clean air, all those things, but you don't do it by hitting people in the pocket. There are better ways of doing it, and I would like to actually more incentivisation for clean fuel technology, for example. But anyway.
Just an aside, following up on something you said just there, do you actually think what Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are offering is socialist in a meaningful way? Starmer himself only has called himself a socialist publicly once in the past few years, and there's pressure on Labour politicians to say that because it's on the back of the membership card. But do you actually, they're not offering, Soviet-style planned economy. In fact, they don't even want to spend that much more money than Tories.
But they're not the traditional socialists that I grew up with. I'm thinking of Michael Foot and people like that. I have a lot of respect for them. John Smith. I had a lot of respect for those people because you knew where you stood with them. And I do believe that certain things they were doing were quite good. But the Tories, they're socialist. And you've heard.
What makes a Tory socialist? They've privatised quite a lot of industry.
Well, they've also increased taxation since 1948. It's the highest tax we've ever had. I mean, I believe in small state, low taxation. Okay, and we defend our borders fundamentally like that. You're looking at the moment. I mean, your listeners can't see me, but I can tell you, I'm a proud Thatcherite. That's what I am. I've been brought up on that. My dad was a Lib Dem. Joe Grimmond. I go back as far as that, remembering that. And get this also, a little matter of the fact that in 1973 I voted to go into the common market.
Well, in the referendum? Yeah,
because I believe I do think we should have shared trade deals right across the world, no problem. But I just don't want to be governed by people in terms of legals, ECHR and stuff like that. So that's why I voted. It took I wavered a bit, but I joined Nigel the day of the referendum, and I voted to I want out. But it was a close thing.
In the unlikely event that you might win.
Oh, Paul, come and have faith.
What does the future hold for you after this? Are you going to stay in politics? Are you going to stand for the county council elections, maybe?
I really don't know, Paul, but I am continuing to run Fairfield UK. I am going to be relaunching that. It's been a bit of, I've had to take my eye off the ball a bit of that recently, but up until now, it's just been a supporter base. I say it's 1.7 million people across the country who care about actually the cost of motoring. And really, I'm going to be increasing not just on fuel duty, but I'll be fighting things I said earlier, 20 mile an hour limits, LTNs, all those sorts of things that really, there's so many anti-driver policies. And I collared Sir Keir Starmer in Paul Cullis' house. And for the listeners, Paul Cullis' house is where the MPs actually have their offices. And he was sitting down for coffee, and he knows me. And I said, "Hello, Sir Keir, what are you going to be doing for motorists when you get into government?" And that's before we knew there was going to be an election. And he said, "Oh no, they'll be safe under me, no problems at all." So I challenge your listeners to actually whether they believe that a Labour Party will actually not have any anti-driver policies, because I've seen some documentation to say that they are going to put that fuel duty in the first budget.
You're not convinced by their flashy video this week saying drivers are safe under Labour, will wage more on potholes, etc.?
Not one bit. I think it's a pathological lie. And, manifestos are books of Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. It's as simple as that. I mean, we don't call ours a manifesto. We call it a contract with the people and a draft report. And next week we'll be announcing it. So I can't tell you some of the good things that are going to be coming out of that, but I think you'll find the common sense to be oozing out of every page.
Well, I look forward to reading it. Howard Cox, thank you very much for joining us. All right, everyone, that's your lot for this week. Thanks to Rob, Paul and Sean for joining me this week, and to our special guest, Howard Cox. We'll have another packed episode as usual next week, and I hope you can join us then. You can now follow us on X, what used to be known as Twitter. Just search for the Kent Politics Podcast. And as ever, don't forget to tune in to KNTV at 5 p.m. each Friday for their own politics show, and follow Kent Online for all the latest election coverage. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show with Rob Bailey on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.